And I don't want to compare running for office to being behind bars. But there is a similarity in that, contrary to the usual attitude of people who run for office and the context, when running for office is part of a social movement, and in fact I've been part of social movements for 40 years now, the whole character of a campaign could and should change. Let's face it, most political campaigns are screwed up. They're screwed up because they're about going up a political ladder for an individual rather than helping to build social movements, or as we say, inside outside. And that's our only future, is social movements. That's the only future we've ever been able to create worth feeling good about. If we go back from the right to vote for women, for unemployment compensation, for civil rights, for gay rights, for the environment, for stopping, or at least stopping wars sooner than they would have been stopped otherwise, of course we know it's about social movements. Well, there are two precepts, as I've sat here this evening, that I kept thinking about that are really a core of what's possible for us. One is, and essential for us, one is a single standard of human rights, and the other is democracy. And in fact, they sound very simple, but those two precepts are absolutely radical in the sense of going to the roots of the kind of future that we can and must create. A single standard of human rights would revolutionize U.S. foreign policy. Absolutely revolutionize it. And, you know, I've been asked, of course, many times already, well, as a candidate, where do you stand on Israel and Palestine? Right? And the answer is deceptively simple. I stand for a single standard of human rights.
Exactly.
It shouldn't be considered some convoluted, extremely complicated matrix, and then you've got to tap dance around. If you've got to get up in the morning and tap dance around any profound question, then you shouldn't be in political movements to begin with. So a single standard of human rights would help us to deal with the entire complexities. It would be fundamental to how we can transform not only U.S. foreign policy, but before that, our own capacity to change the frame of discourse in the United States. And the other, even more deceptively simple, is democracy. I mean, that would be extremely radical in this country. One person, one vote functionally, rather than, as a practical matter, bigger megaphone for bigger dollars. $1, one vote, in effect, is what we're dealing with right now. And then, coming off of that, I'm going to argue that democracy is the best vehicle to stop war. In fact, it is the only vehicle to stop war is to implement real democracy in this country and around the world. I've been lucky enough to visit a number of places around the world, including Damascus, Baghdad, Amman, Jerusalem, Tehran, Kabul, and these are places generally under great turmoil. And one of the realities is when you get outside your own bubble in this country, you have the opportunity to realize that we all face the same basic challenges and that all of the stereotypes are wrong. They are just wrong. And as long as we are trapped within a stereotypical belief, we can't get to the most profound reality, which is that people around the world are of the same basic human family. That may sound like a platitude, but it's a pretty damn good one because it's really true. When I was in Tehran 6 years ago, I went to the souk there and I talked with folks. One of them was somebody who had pushed the envelope. He actually was selling women's underwear in public, which apparently was a sort of a edgy thing to do about 6 years ago in Iran. And we got to talking. Anyway, we talked about the world and politics and so forth. And he said something that has very much stayed with me. He said that everybody around the world wants peace. And it is the governments from one continent to another that keep preventing us from getting what we want. And if we have democracy, we will get what we want. That is the reality. And it's especially for us a crucial reality here in the United States. I was interviewed a couple weeks ago by Marin Magazine, and in the course of the interview, toward the end, the editor asked me, what is the most proud, fulfilling moment you've ever had in your life? And I paused and I said, well, can I have 3? And he said, he's granted me my wish. He granted me 3, to mention. And one, I said, was when I worked with hundreds and hundreds of people to shut down an operating nuclear power plant in Oregon in 1977 and 78 and 79. And I spent 2 years of my life doing that. We organized nonviolence training around the state, actually around the Northwest, because people in Washington State as well as Oregon. And we did a lot of research and public education, because it wasn't about just go blockade the nuclear power plant. Yes, we did the Gandhian process of the nonviolence training. We met with the governor and the chief of police and told them what we were going to do and all the rest of that. We also did the public education so people would understand why we were doing that. And it's very much related to what Bill was saying. One of our breakthroughs was that when we had 100 people sit in front of the main gate for the first time in U.S. history of an operating nuclear power plant with a demand that it be shut down immediately, we didn't just go and leave. We stayed and stayed and stayed for 2 days and nights until the authorities finally realized that we weren't going away of our own volition. And then at dawn, they came in and dragged us off to jail. And then a couple of months later, we came back with 125 people, and they didn't wait a day and a half. They dragged us off. So then the next year, we organized 4 days of waves. We had 280 arrests over a 4-day period. We filled the jails in Oregon to 7 counties. And we made a statement that was, we're not accepting this deadly, horrific technology in our midst. The second thing I mentioned was that a few years later in our community, we discovered that these oddly colored trains were coming through. I mean, I had never seen a white train before. And all of a sudden, along the Columbia Gorge were these white trains. And it turned out they were starting in Texas at the Amarillo plant, Pantex plant. And they were going up to Bangor, Washington. And what were they carrying? Well, they were carrying multiply targeted re-entry vehicle nuclear warheads designed to hit many Soviet and Chinese cities at the same time, capable of killing hundreds of millions of people in a matter of hours, and especially suitable for first strike. So we did our research and we did our organizing, and when the train came through one day, we were on the tracks. And we stayed on the tracks for 35 minutes while the train stopped. And then we were removed, the train went on its unmerry way. Then the next time the train came through, we were on the tracks for 2.5 hours. There were more of us. And the train stopped for 2.5 hours. And I got to tell you, to see a nuclear weapons train stop in its tracks for 2.5 hours made us think, wow, it's not long enough. But if we can stop them for 30 minutes, we can stop for 2.5 hours, maybe we can stop them for a lot longer. Maybe we can even stop them from being deployed. Maybe we can even stop them from being manufactured. Maybe we can even stop these nuclear arsenals from existing. It is possible. Si se puede. We can do it, and we can do it now. The third thing I mentioned was that one morning I woke up and I was in Baghdad, and I can't tell you how good I felt about that. It was because in the summer of 2002, Saddam Hussein announced that he was inviting members of the U.S. Congress to Iraq to search for weapons of mass destruction. And at one level that was absurd because nobody had the technical expertise on Capitol Hill to really search and inspect for nuclear weapons. But there was an opening there. And both President George W. Bush's administration and the Democrats on Capitol Hill, they all just made fun of it. It was a stupid offer, it was propaganda and so forth. And meanwhile, I thought, wow, well, this is an opportunity. This door is open for dialogue. Instead of just hurling invective from Washington to Baghdad and back, how about a chance to meet together and talk about some alternatives to what was already, as it turned out, 8 months before the invasion, clearly becoming a determined preparation by the Bush administration to launch a war on Iraq. And so, long story short, the nonprofit institute that I started, the Institute for Public Accuracy, was engaged in beating the Bushes, not the Bush administration per se, beating the Bushes on Capitol Hill to find a member of Congress willing to go to Baghdad to talk to those officials of the Saddam Hussein regime. And it was not easy, as you can imagine. There were a lot of reasons why members of Congress wouldn't go, couldn't go, and so on and so forth. But finally, we found a guy named Nick Rahal, a Democrat from West Virginia, of Arab descent, by the way, who, together with former U.S. Senator Jim Aberrest from South Dakota, was willing to go with me and a humanitarian leader from a group called Conscience International named Jim Jennings. And the four of us figured out how to go to Baghdad. And our institute paid for it. There wasn't any tax money. Well, this is sort of a parable. You may recognize it from the last couple pages of Kafka's book, The Trial, right? Because that door was open. It was sort of an inverse of what parable unfolded, how it unfolded at the end of Kafka's book. The door was open. And there was a recognition among us that it was open. And so, to his credit, Congressman Rahal decided he's going to Baghdad. Well, that was against the law. You weren't supposed to go to Baghdad without permission from the U.S. government. And so the State Department told Rahal not to go, and he replied, well, I'm going. And so I was headed to the airport, to SFO, and Rahal was headed to Dulles Airport, and the State Department called and said, oh, Congressman Rahal, okay, you can go. Well, he was already going. Right? So when the next day, essentially, we all woke up in Baghdad, I thought, wow, you can imagine something that seems almost impossible, and you can do it. And how many thousands and thousands of times have we in this room, collectively, by aggregate, discovered that in all kinds of ways that have to do with organizing, moving beyond the conformity. Conformity is death. As the anti-AIDS activists put it, silence is death. Silence in this society of militarism and repression and poverty, silence is death. We're not going to be silent. So in closing, I want to say that every day we face this series of challenges about how to overcome our acculturations. The acculturation that tells us we should do as we're told, that we should, by any other name, be passive, that we should tune into history rather than help to create it, that those in authority positions, whatever their flaws, basically can be trusted. And when I hear that assumption expressed time and again, I think of something that the Nobel-winning biologist George Wald said in 1969, professor at Harvard. He gave a speech that at MIT was widely reported on, the Boston Globe reprinted it, and it caused an enormous amount of soul-searching in our own society back then in 1969. He talked about the statement of a member of the U.S. Senate that if the planet needed to start over with Adam and Eve, with one man and one woman on the planet, he wanted that man and woman to be an American. This Nobel-winning biologist talked about how our bodies are made up of the stuff of stars, of our solar system. How we carry with us the evolution from millions of years. And then he went on to observe that we in the United States had a government preoccupied with the business of killing. That was a statement in 1969. It is true in 2011. And the opportunity and the task remains with us to speak truth to and about the power that is willing and able to destroy life on this planet in the service of a deranged, unhinged set of agendas. By saying no, we can also say yes. Thank you very much for being here.